Hello and welcome to my presentation, which is showcasing the process behind creating my game and 3D character for Creative Hack Lab 2. My idea for my project was to create a realistic 3D environment game in Unity. I wanted to create a model in Blender that would fit this game, as my original idea was to place this model as a character in my game. Due to this, I wanted to create a model that would fit in this sort of environment. I didn't want to create a low poly character, as I felt this wouldn't suit the hyper realistic game I was going to create. I didn't want to create a human model, as it would be quite challenging to make this look like an actual person. Therefore, I created a model that looks somewhere in between a human and a goblin or giant character. Now to get onto some of the tools that I've used in this project. In terms of Unity, the main thing that allowed my game to function properly and have a goal and rules was the use of C# code. This allowed me to create a scoring system so that when the user collected a gem in my game, the gem would disappear. Audio would let them know that it had been collected, and their score in the top left corner would go up. It also allowed the game to end when they reached 500 points and allowed my main menu to function properly. Of course, terrain painting tools came in handy when creating my environment. It allowed me to create a game world that looked realistic. I utilised cameras for my first-person controller game, but I also added an extra camera that gave bird's eye view for my minimap. UI elements were added to create the look of my menu, my minimap, and to add text using the Text Mesh Pro feature. Now, in terms of Blender, I built my 3D character using the sculpt method, which enabled me to create a very realistic and detailed model. However, this did cause issues later down the line. It meant that I couldn't add armature to rig my character. Instead, I had to manually pose it and add keyframes, which I'll touch on more later. I used the particle system in Blender to create grass, which put my model into a scene, making it look more effective. The colour on my character's skin and clothes was created using vertex paint, so I had to learn to use the nodes function in Blender 2.8 to turn the paint into a texture so that it would show up in my render. And as previously mentioned, keyframes were used to animate the character and change its location on the plane to create the walking effect. Utilising resources was key to the success of my project. I used YouTube tutorials across all aspects of this project. For example, in Blender when using the nodes function and posing my character, and in Unity when creating my score system and minimap. I referred back to Moodle many times during this project for lecture slides, particularly the Unity PDFs on building an environment, for example, the island demo one, and also looked at assessment guidelines to make sure I was on track and fitting the project brief. Microsoft Teams was also extremely useful. Because the Hack Week for this project was done remotely, it was initially more difficult not having lectures in the same room for guidance and support. However, using the features on Microsoft Teams such as screen sharing to show Chikezi and Sam issues I was having helped me massively and also allowed me to solve problems very quickly. This is a tool I would love to continue using for other projects, particularly group work. Unity's website was also very useful. I mostly used the asset store to download game objects for my game, which made it look more realistic and exciting than it would have without them. I also used their forums for support. With this project, I knew I had a lot to do, and at first it seemed quite overwhelming. I find it useful with projects like this to create a Gantt chart so I know exactly what I need to do and when I need to do it by. As you can see, I broke down the tasks into really small parts so I was more organised. Now on to some of the challenges that I faced in this project. As previously mentioned, when using Blender, I was unable to rig my character due to the lack of bones because I'd created it in the sculpt method. Therefore, I manually sculpted it using the pose tool and shape keys. Shape keys allowed me to shift from the original pose to the new pose simply by changing the value. Then I just added keyframes and changed the model's position on the plane. This was definitely a longer process. One, because I was doing everything manually and there was over 1 million verts on my model, making it function really slowly. Second of all, it was difficult to make the movement look natural and lifelike. However, in the end, after spending some time fine-tuning the poses, I think I got a good result and a good animation. Another challenge was my vertex paint not showing up in my render. After some research on support forums, I saw that I would have to use the nodes feature for the first time. I didn't understand how or why I had to do this, but found a really useful tutorial which helped me understand how to convert the vertex paint into a texture so that it would actually show up in my render. Finally, the scale of my model was very large, which was done intentionally, which meant that when I wanted to add grass or hair particles to my plane, I needed thousands and thousands of hairs. This really slowed down my machine and the software, and also meant that if I was to render it like this, it would take absolutely ages. I managed to scale all the objects down and then tweak my animation accordingly. However, rendering still took a very long time. My first render took over 24 hours, and in the end, I wasn't happy with it, so I did it again. However, this time I researched what settings to use for my render so that it would be faster, such as adding a motion blur effect and more tiles for CPU blending, which allows it to actually work faster. This time, the render took only 6 hours. Whilst I still had challenges in Unity, I found it much easier to use or to solve problems than I did in Blender. I found that there was also a lot more resources and tutorials available online for Unity. One of the challenges I did have was adding script to game objects. In a tutorial I was using for my score system, it said that I could simply drag and drop the script onto my game object. However, I kept having the error message, can't add script. After speaking with Chikezi on Microsoft Teams, he told me that I would have to manually add the component, and this solved the issue quite quickly. I had another issue with my first-person controller camera starting off my terrain and not where I'd placed it in the game. To fix this, I searched the hierarchy in my project for camera and noticed there was a camera in the water outside of my terrain, which is why it was starting off the terrain. I simply removed this camera and the problem was solved. Learning to use C# was a little challenging. However, as I mentioned before, there's many tutorials online which helped me. All I had to do was search what I wanted to do on YouTube, and I'd find loads of tutorials that would help me. So here is the footage of my gameplay and my 3D character animation. You can simply click on the images to play them and watch them in this slide, or you can click the launch video text to view it in YouTube. The aim of the game is to collect all 10 gems in the forest. After completing my game and character animation, I had some spare time, so I created a poster for my game, which you can see here. And that brings us to the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. You can use the QR codes below to contact me with any questions and to also play my videos in YouTube. And on the next slide, you will see my references. Thanks for listening.